from the textbook, if you need help, use undo. Is you're going to want to keep all of your math work with you because your math work is...
My daughter had always been a good student, always loved school. Then suddenly, in the 4th grade, just kind of quit. She wasn't interested in school anymore. She'd struggle to get out of bed, she'd fake being sick. Getting her to complete her homework was a total battle. It's as if almost overnight she decided school wasn't for her. After she brought home a bad score on a math test, we requested a meeting with her teacher.
Well, my concern is when she comes home, for example, this math test brought it up again, which is she pulls up the math test, okay, what did you do wrong? And she seems to have absolutely no idea. I know her well enough to where she's testing is
not where she should
way
be.
below. One of the things I've just been thinking about is, you know, we had a very frank talk the other night before she fell asleep, and I don't know how to work through this, but she just kind of said, I said, well, describe to me how you feel in class, like what's going on? Because as I said, it's as if she was never here for some of the, now sometimes she's not here, but when she is here, she's not here, and clearly there's talking going on and whatnot, but I said, so when you're looking up at, you know, it's math time. Yeah. What are you feeling? And she said, I look up and I'm not interested.
Really? My daughter's in law school right now, and Scout, everybody who gets to law school has to be pretty smart to get there, right? So it's a lot of people who are really smart in law school, and my daughter is hit for the first time. It's really hard for her. Truthfully, you're building your character right now. You're building that perseverance and that sense of I want to do my best.
Now freeze. Look at that face right there. I know that face. That face is saying, this is bullshit. This whole thing called school is bullshit. Now, later that night, after this conference at home, I'll tell her that school seems meaningless now, but later, when she's applying to college or when she's looking for a job, she'll understand what this was all for. She needs to take this seriously now because one day, she'll see that this will all make sense. But after spending 2 years working on this film, I now worry these things that I've told my daughter and my son are a lie. The idea of enduring the drudgery of standardized tests, traditional homework, lectures will build the kind of character in them that will one day lead to a happier life may no longer be true. Consider this economist out of MIT who argues that kids who will go on to do well in school and graduate from college won't necessarily be able to find a job. Most parents today grew up in a world which saw the U.S. economy grow and median income grow with it. And that's always been true. Until here. Curiously, around the late 90s, the economy had grown, but middle-class income had not. In essence, the U.S. economy is now able to produce more wealth while hiring fewer and fewer people. And this is troubling, particularly for college graduates. In addition to being saddled with record levels of debt, 53% of all recent college graduates either can't find a job or are working at a job they could have just as easily have found if they'd skipped school altogether. This trend, according to The Economist, is not because of the recession. It's not because China is stealing all of our jobs. It's because of a startling shift in technology that's probably best illustrated in an event that occurred back in 1997.
Garry Kasparov is one of the world's all-time great chess players. He played a series of matches against an IBM supercomputer called Deep Blue, and in 1997, Deep Blue beat him. Not by a lot, by a pretty narrow margin, but at that point, the world's best chess player was no longer a human being. the story I've heard is that the supercomputer geeks at IBM were looking around for the next challenge after Deep Blue beat Kasparov, because computer chess just became uninteresting. And the story goes, one of the IBM executives or managers responsible for thinking about this was in a bar one night, and he noticed that everyone in the dining room got up in the middle of dinner, left their half-eaten steaks on their plates, and ran into the bar to watch TV. And he thought some amazing sporting event was going on. It turns out they ran in there to watch Jeopardy because Ken Jennings was in the middle of an amazing run as a Jeopardy champion. He won 73 times in a row, took home more than $3 million, and became kind of a folk hero in America because he really did appear to have been genetically engineered and raised from birth by ninjas to play the game of Jeopardy. And at that point, the story goes, the IBM exec said, I know what our next challenge is. We're going to build the Jeopardy playing supercomputer.
And welcome everyone to a very special Jeopardy event. This is Watson.
I get a phone call and they said, IBM built that computer to beat you at Jeopardy. Would you be up for this? I'm like, yes, this is like the greatest thing I've ever heard. This is what the future seemed like to me as a kid. Robots would be playing on TV game shows, But also, I had like a pretty good idea that I was gonna win. I was a computer programmer before I went on Jeopardy, so I'd taken like artificial intelligence classes at college, and I knew that there was no computer out there that could do what you would have to do to win at Jeopardy. Computers are terrible at understanding all language. But Jeopardy clues are worse than most. They've got double meanings and puns and literary allusions and red herrings. There's a lot of dots that have to be connected, a lot of intuition going on. And computers are bad at making those kind of leaps.
For the iron fitting on the hoof of a horse or a card dealing box in a casino. Watson.
What is issue?
You are right. You get to pick. Wanted for killing Sir Danvers Carew. Appearance pale and dwarfish. Seems to have a split personality.
Who is Hyde?
Hyde, yes. Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Either one acceptable. You're now in the lead with 1,400.
Who is Michael Phelps?
Yes. Go.
What is Event Horizon? Who is Grendel? What is The Last Judgment?
Correct. Go again.
I was standing to Watson's right, and Watson actually has a little mechanical thumb, so I can hear this sort of insectoid clicking. And as his score mounted, I remember thinking, this is it. It's sort of like, I sort of felt like, some 80s Detroit auto worker on the assembly line looking at the robot who had replaced him on the welding machine. I thought my job of knowing things was not going to be replaceable by a computer. And yet, here it is, I'm obsolete, and I'm obsolete on national television. So maybe game show contestant is the first information age job to be made obsolete by our new computer overlords, but I feel like it's not going to be the last.
This is a jobs report that appeared on the Forbes website, and it's just kind of a vanilla-looking report about corporate earnings. The only thing interesting about it to me is that it was generated entirely by an algorithm. There was no human being involved in producing this or writing it or editing it. The company's called Narrative Science, and what they do is take a body of facts, in other words, all the details of corporate earnings, and they write a prose narrative about it. And if you read these, they are perfectly clean, clear English prose. Now, only a few years ago, we couldn't do this. If you wanted to have something written, you had to involve a human being in that work. And the consequence that I spend a lot of time thinking about is, what are people going to do for a living when their muscle power really isn't valued anymore because we have all kinds of muscle accelerators? And then their mental power is not as valued anymore because we have these astonishing digital technologies that can do mental things, cognitive things that we used to previously require people to do.
Very soon we're going to get to a world where, a vast chunk of the American middle class has a job that can be a formerly safe job that can be done by a computer or a robot. What happens to society when hundreds of millions of people have that aimless, rudderless feeling of you know. I've been replaced by a very small box or a very short shell script. I don't know if there's a solution.
The last significant change in the way we educated our kids occurred around 124 years ago. It was the dawn of the Industrial Revolution. Most kids were raised on farms, and jobs were plentiful and predictable. Then, in 1843, an educator from Massachusetts decides to visit Prussia on his honeymoon, where he witnesses a brand new type of education. Up until that time, education primarily consisted of smart people sitting around talking to other smart people. But after the Prussians were embarrassed in the Napoleonic Wars in the 1800s, this Prussian decides to institute a new type of education for every German boy from 7 to 14 years old, which results in a more fit, more organized, more obedient army. Among his many reforms was this idea: to divide up instruction according to age, ability, and subject matter. Strange as it seems today, this had never been done before. This idea of teaching math in one room, science in another room, language skills in yet another was totally new. Horace Mann witnesses this new educational model and he's stunned. Inspired by what he sees, he brings these educational ideas back to the U.S. where it captures the attention of these men. Just like the Prussians, who were anxious to develop more obedient troops, these fathers of the Industrial Revolution were desperate to transform our nation of disorganized farm laborers into trained, efficient workers for their factory and assembly line jobs.
We divide the day up in high schools into bits of time, into 40 or 50-minute blocks typically, and then we ring bells and people start to shuffle around the building and do something else. That's an organizational device, it's not an educational principle. And it is, in broad sweeps, a system that resembles a factory culture.
If you built a factory in upstate New York and another along the Ohio River, you desperately needed these workers to behave similarly, to know the same kinds of things. If high school graduates in Ohio could quote Shakespeare, but students in New York couldn't even write their own name, it was difficult to build a standard set of factories which utilized both sets of workers. That's when it was decided to form a committee called the Committee of 10. The committee was tasked with coming up with a standard set of subjects every kid should know.
10 university heads in 1890 said, in 11th grade, everyone should learn chemistry. In senior year, everyone should learn physics, and that it should be earth science. They came up with this whole trajectory calculus, and a lot of these subjects are great, but these priorities were dictated 120 years ago, 124 years ago.
Back in 1892, the Committee of 10 designed our nation's curriculum, and for the most part, it has not changed.
The biggest employer in Baltimore 50 years ago was Bethlehem Steel Company. You could actually drop out of high school 50 years ago, join the steel union, get a perfectly average job, earning a perfectly average wage, which would entitle you to get a perfectly average mortgage, to buy a perfectly average house, with a perfectly average yard, to have 2.0 perfectly average kids, who would go to a wonderful, perfectly average public school. You could have a perfectly average retirement and have a perfectly average funeral. That is no longer the case.
The economy that we created over the course of the 20th century was an economy that needed a large number of moderately skilled people who could do the 3 R's and who could follow pretty simple instructions. As we head deeper into the 21st century, I really don't think that's the case anymore, yet our educational system still seems to be focused on turning out people with that same relatively small set of skills. My fear is that they're heading into a society and an economy and a workforce that doesn't value those skills very much anymore. And I think we need to take a good hard look and figure out what kinds of people, what kinds of skills are demanded in the technologically extraordinary society and economy that we're creating.